United Soybean Board, Norbrook, Fibro Animal Health, and the Animal Health Corridor. Without our sponsors, we could not have done this. So thanks and hats off to our sponsors. I also want to thank our planning team. We had a great planning team this year, and you'll recognize a few of these faces. And if you haven't seen them lately, you will be seeing them over the course of the next 3 days. So thanks to Dr. Eric Moore, Dr. Andy King, Dr. Megan Nichols, Dr. Heather Fowler, Dr. Paul Plummer, and Dr. Michael Costin. So thanks to all of you. And I know we put a lot of work into putting this together. So thanks to the planning team. I hope you'll enjoy the symposium. And I believe we have some poll results. Before we get there, there is one special person I want to introduce, and that is Dr. Eric Moore, who is the co-chair for the Antibiotics Symposium, as well as the co-chair for the Antibiotics Council. So Eric will be joining me throughout the next 3 days, and we'll be kind of tossing things back and forth and moderating and helping lead everyone through. Before we do that, though, and before I turn it over to Eric, I want to take a look at those poll results and see what we have. Say, wait for it. It looks like the ice cream has it for the favorite dessert. And Eric, feel free to chime in here. So ice cream has it, followed by pie, cake, and then cookies comes in last, believe it or not. The question I have is, what's everybody's beverage of choice with those desserts? But maybe we'll get to talk about that later. The second question, what sector of the ag and food system do you represent? It looks like allied business and industry is in at 28%, academia at 17%, non-governmental organization at 10%, and we have no students. I guess that's a reminder to all of us. We need to get out there and get some students excited to join us. And then I think I need to scroll down here. Post COVID-19, what will your first trip be? Wow, pleasure has it. So 72%, and business says 28%. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm already traveling a bit for business. So I'd like to say pleasure, but for me, that answer was business. Eric, any comments on any of that?
Well, I would say the ice cream and pie question was unfair because usually I have ice cream with my pie on there. I'm sure that was confusing to some.
That probably was. And you know, the same could be said for cake, right?
Yeah, yep, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
That's and then I think of the students out there right now who are all battling their own Zoom classrooms, probably just don't want to be on another Zoom meeting. I'm sure there's a lot of us out there in the audience today. We appreciate you being on here because that's one thing that Zoom has taken over the world, and it's another form of communication. And so we're very fortunate to have on our planning committee and in our group, Dr. Andy King. And he's from the Greenlee School of Communication. Him and I have one thing in common, I noticed, is that we're both wearing the same clothes we had for our pictures on our slide.
Did you plan that?
I did not. That was just some freak of accident that happened there. So, but Dr. King has been involved in our symposium for 2 years now. He's very enthusiastic about communicating correctly, helping our industry communicate better, and then working on techniques, issues, and learning a lot about our business. So I did see a comment from John Blue. We do change our clothes once in a while. We just happen to be up in the same cycle. So, but with that, Dr. King has brought an excellent group in that is going to talk about communication. In the past, we went through the symposiums. We all have great information. We're all experts in our field. We all know what we do best. I think a lot of times it's lost in translation and taking it to the people that need to hear our story. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Andy King to lead us in the communication section of the symposium. Dr. King?
Thank you, sir. And I just want to clarify for our many participants, this is a different shirt. It just looks unbelievably similar to the other shirt that I have. So if that, to the other shirt in that photo, it's not actually, I do have more than 2 shirts. But anyway, good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to take things over here and start the symposium off and talking about communications. As Eric said, I'm at the Greenlee School of Journalism and Communication at Iowa State University. I've been there for about 2.5 years now. Before that, I was at Texas Tech University, and I've been around a few other places before that as well. And so I'm excited to chat with you. My background is in health communication and persuasion for the most part. And within that, I've studied a lot about communicating complex information, which is what's sort of intrigued me to have the opportunity to work with NIAA in this symposium, as well as some of my colleagues at Iowa State on the Science Communication Project. And so really today's sort of opening panel is talking about the complexities of communicating about antimicrobial stewardship in animal agriculture, but also thinking about it as communicating about antimicrobial stewardship in a variety of different contexts. And so I guess to start off, and this is something that I imagine everyone who's attending is familiar with, but when we think about antimicrobial stewardship, I just want to sort of center it on a common definition, which is actions taken to preserve the effectiveness and availability of antimicrobial drugs through conscientious oversight and responsible medical decision-making while safeguarding animal, public, and environmental health. And so that sort of takes a One Health approach to this and considers a variety of different behaviors. So responsible use of antibiotics, integrating alternative medical solutions, and a general focus on disease prevention strategies. And so last year, as part of this symposium, at the 9th symposium, which was held in Ames, just on the campus of Iowa State University, we held a workshop, myself and some of my colleagues in the Greenlee School, that tasked attendees with identifying audiences, motivations, and goals related to their antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial stewardship communication. And we divided people into 4 groups. Producers and farmers was the first group, veterinarians and researchers and academics were the second group, government representatives the third group, and industry representatives the fourth group. Looking at that initial poll, we have a fairly good percentage of participants representing each of those groups today. And we were interested in a number of things. But the first question we asked people in this session was, what makes communication about antimicrobial stewardship difficult? Excuse me. And so we came up with sort of 4 general categories across all 4 groups, and different audiences had slightly different perspectives on this, but overwhelmingly these 4 categories came up. And so the first was consumer misperceptions about antibiotic use. And those varied depending on the group that we were talking to specifically, but that won't surprise a lot of individuals that are participating in this panel, that consumer misperceptions about antibiotic use, particularly in animal agriculture, was a point of concern for communication efforts. Another aspect that made communication difficult was lack of knowledge about agriculture in general in sort of members of the public. Other sort of individuals suggested misleading news media coverage or incomplete media coverage about antibiotic use in agricultural contexts. And then social media and social network misinformation, which is a topic that sort of cuts across sectors at this point in time as sort of a point of interest and emphasis, but that there was a lot of misinformation about antibiotics. Another thing that came out of that session, where we talked with all these groups about who were their key audiences of interest for communicating about antimicrobial stewardship and antimicrobial resistance. For producers and farmers, participants last year identified consumers, media members, and policymakers as their audiences of interest. Veterinarians and academics were interested in communicating primarily with veterinarian students and producers. Government officials were interested in communicating with producers and legislators, and industry representatives were interested in communicating with consumers and retailers. So there's some overlap there. Industry representatives and producers were both interested in talking with consumers, where veterinarians were not interested in that. But what never came up in those discussions is the fact that all of those audiences, those sort of big groups, policymakers, consumers, media members, all have segments inside of them that need to be considered for communicative efforts. And so all of those audiences have multiple segments: consumers, media outlets, policymakers. There are state and federal policymakers. There are people who engage in lobbying that might be a part of an organization or represent an industry that you're working with, but they might be related to and working with an adjacent industry. And so how do you decide what to include in your message content, depending on all of those audiences and all of those segments? That was something that never really came up in that workshop, with the exception of a few stories that people shared about effective communication that worked. On the human health side for antibiotic communication, they think about audience segments a little bit differently. They think about people in terms of 4 categories: stewards, stalkers, persuaders, and dissenters. Stewards are people who have a low likelihood of engaging in problematic behavior and a high likelihood of taking effective actions. Stalkers are people who have a high likelihood of storing unused antibiotics for treating future infections, and they're willing to share unused antibiotics with others. Persuaders are people who are likely to argue with providers who refuse to provide antibiotics, and dissenters have a low likelihood of engaging in effective actions and a high likelihood of engaging in problematic behaviors. What's interesting to me about these 4 categories is that they might not fit directly into animal agriculture or directly into the audience that you're most interested in communicating with about antimicrobial stewardship and antimicrobial resistance. However, it gives a nice referent to think about what are the ways that I can segment an audience that I am interested in communicating with, and what might I want to tell them specifically about our practices with antibiotics, or about our best practices, and sort of how are we being responsible with antibiotic use and considering antimicrobial stewardship overall. And with those content considerations, it becomes something else. In our discussions last year in the symposium, I guess an overarching point of frustration was people wanted other people to change based on the information that they provided. But what wasn't clear is what was the change that people were trying to evoke out of someone based on the information shared. Sometimes it was knowledge, sometimes it was a specific behavior, like a consumer behavior or a voting behavior, but a lot of times it was not specified. And so for any communication plan, it's really important to think about an audience, it's important to think about content, it's important to connect that content to the audience and an outcome of interest. And so that leads us into this year's symposium and this year's communication session, in which we thought it was a good option to bring in people who are sort of the boots on the ground for communication efforts for agricultural professionals, and who can talk through a variety of different strategies that they use. And one of the things that kind of came out of last year's symposium about content and about all of this is that there was a big focus on something called accuracy, which is accuracy of scientific information reaching audiences. And that obviously is paramount for a lot of reasons and should always be important. But accuracy by itself is rarely enough to be a successful strategic communication strategy. And so there have to be other audience factors considered, like ability, motivation, norms, and values. And so all of our speakers today, in some capacity, will be talking about those things. And I'm excited to be able to introduce these presenters to you, who will go through and talk about a variety of different experiences that they've had, and practices that they're engaged with now, or that they are familiar with, that the industry has been engaged with in the past, as well as sort of what does the next generation of agricultural communications look like, and how are we working on the academic side to train those individuals to sort of be better prepared to deal with the complexities of communicating about antimicrobial stewardship. And so with that, I have the pleasure of transitioning to our first speaker today, Terri Moore. Terri is the VP of Communications there it is, there's the slide, for the American Farm Bureau Federation. She leads communications at the national level, coordinating with affiliated farm bureaus in all 50 states. She has 20 years of experience in strategic government and crisis communications, and she's going to be talking about some of the sort of historical perspectives on things, current practices, and sort of missteps that have happened in the past that we can learn from and build from moving forward. So Terri, thanks for being with us, and I'll turn things over to you. Thank you,
Andy. That's a perfect setup for the information that I'm delighted to present. And I would just ask everybody to maybe remove themselves, like once removed from what I'm about to say, because I don't want it to be perceived as criticism so much as, you know, that Monday morning quarterbacking is so much easier than when you're in the midst of trying to work your way through an issue. And we can learn a lot and apply the lessons, I think, that we learn from maybe some things that we could have done better related to antibiotics, and apply those lessons to many other things. So please feel free to jump in and challenge me, or at least when we get to the discussion point. If you disagree with anything I say, I welcome that conversation. But I would note that very early on, when we knew that antibiotics were becoming a growing concern, we tended to want to rely on science and facts to win the day, right? We sort of poo-pooed the growing concern. Oh, those are just folks who are ill-informed or activists stirring things up. And there wasn't a tremendous effort, and certainly not a coordinated effort, to frame the issue. Then once we started to engage as an agricultural community, we focused on the benefits to farmers, right? We talked about farm efficiency and cost effectiveness, but you didn't hear so much about those basic values that actually connect with consumers, like preventing animal suffering, right? It struck me years and years ago when I started consulting around this topic. You know, one of the really, really powerful messages around antibiotics is that we use antibiotics in animals for the same reason we use them in people, to prevent pain and suffering, right? Yet that seemed to be, for so many groups, oh, that's elementary. We don't need to say that. You know, that we wanted to go back to the science and the data. And I'm sure, just knowing who participates in NIAA, I'm sure you all know that values are so much more powerful in building trust in science and facts, 3 to 5 times more powerful. Yet we were even reluctant, if we're honest with ourselves, early on, to say that we shared the concern about antibiotic resistance. There were some who thought that saying that meant we were accepting blame for the problem. And if we can't even say that we share a concern that's growing in the public, then we're probably going to be in trouble. We talked over people, right? And on this issue in particular, by using scientific terms and jargon, you know, Andy mentioned about the importance of scientific accuracy. Absolutely. But terminology and jargon that people don't understand, it doesn't matter how accurate you are if no one understands what you're saying, right? And finding that balance on a topic this complicated was a challenge for us. You know, everybody talks about speaking at an 8th grade level of understanding if you want to reach the broadest audience. And I would say not only did we miss that goalpost, we probably missed that stadium. You know, we talked about growth promotion. Well, even today, I would challenge you to tell me most people know what that is. Even the very word antimicrobial, when I was doing a training with a group of vets, one of the veterinarians was absolutely insistent that she was not going to dumb down the language, that she was going to talk about antimicrobials. And so we challenged that a little bit, you know, to the detriment or cost of folks not really knowing that what you're talking about is antibiotics. Of course, people know that antibiotics are part of in the family of antimicrobials. Well, we went down to the office lobby, the cameraman, and one of the trainers, and did an informal poll just to show that no one knew what antimicrobials were. So sometimes what becomes such common vocabulary for us, we really have to step back from. And then, you know, there were things like minimum residue levels and resistance versus residue, and lots of challenging aspects of the topic. I would say we also did a poor job countering the narrative about agriculture being responsible for human antibiotic resistance and antibiotic resistance in general, right? The very first thing we did was point the finger at human health and human medicine and the overuse of antibiotics in that community. And rarely does the blame game build trust, right? So instead of saying this is a shared concern and we all have a role to play, and you know, here's some information you might be interested in about the various contributing factors, sort of an approach. And then we just didn't have, there were a lot of disparate voices in agriculture, right? We hadn't coalesced around, you know, there is this study and that study and different data points, and it was probably confusing to people within agriculture, much less outside of agriculture. We would have been very well served to have engaged the food supply chain more quickly. And you all know that. Once the major restaurant chains started going to antibiotic-free meat, the battle became so much bigger to get us back to a point of level setting. And by the way, I think agriculture is doing a much better job of that, of engaging the food system now and helping them to understand. You know, one of the things that broke my heart was hearing one of the major restaurant chains that had gone to antibiotic-free say, well, we did it because it was the right thing to do, right? For animals, right? And that just revealed, you know, the lack of knowledge, perhaps. And there was a fair amount of criticism of those alternative practices, right? Raising antibiotic-free animals. You heard lots of folks in the ag community say pretty harsh things about that, and criticizing and shaming something that we don't agree with when the public thinks that that's what their values align with is not likely to find that common ground. So instead of doing that, just talking about the trade-offs. Well, we believe in consumer choice, but here are some trade-offs. And we did a much better job of that as time went on. The final observation that I will make is that when the conversation really heated up about a ban on growth promotion and all the conversations with FDA and USDA, we very nearly, I think, snatched defeat from the jaws of victory by resisting, you know, instead of demonstrating that our commitment to responsible use means we will accept this and we have, you know, signed on to it in the interest of, you know, trying to be good citizens and use antibiotics as responsibly as we can. And there was much disagreement, I know, about whether banning growth promotion would actually be impactful, but coming out appearing not to be as supportive of something that the vast majority of the country thought was a responsible move in the right direction was potentially very, very damaging. So, I mean, I think we got there, and there probably wasn't huge, broad public awareness of some of the bickering about it, but I would say we were close to not putting our best foot forward on that one. So with that, Andy, I'll turn it back to you, and certainly be happy to talk through any of those observations later.
Yeah, I appreciate your perspective, Terri, because I think it gives a really nice overview that this isn't a new problem. This isn't a new challenge, I should say. Maybe problem is the wrong word. It's not a new challenge. You said a lot about, you know, finding shared language and the sort of there have been reports and when I say reports, I'm referring to a study out of the UK that talked about, you know, antimicrobial resistance promotion has a language problem and talking about superbugs versus antimicrobial resistance versus antibiotic resistance, and that all of the terms actually really do refer to something a little bit different. What are some strategies that you think might be useful for people to use, or that you found useful in your past work, to find shared language and values that can be used in communication efforts?
You know, some of it is talking through, literally taking your circle of friends, your group at church, your coworkers, if they're not in the industry, and running some statements past them. Do you understand what this means? Or tell me what you think of this, or really grounding what we're talking about. Yes, there are distinctions between different terms, but are they important enough that we need to use the scientific terms that people don't understand, right? Where do you draw those lines? And that there's no hard and fast rule for that, for sure. But it is critically important.
Well, another thing that came up last year, and we talked about a little bit at the sort of to summarize that session, and it looks like someone put in the chat a link to some of the breakout sessions that we talked last year. And Michael Dahlstrom, who's a colleague of mine here, really always focuses on sort of people telling their stories to get across those shared values. And is that something that you've you found success in, and sort of, I think even that by itself, right, to suggest to someone like, tell your story. There's a lot of ways to tell stories, including some bad ways. And so do you have any sort of tips for people who are here in attendance and thinking about all of the different ways that they talk about, like that antimicrobial resistance can be talked about and stewardship can be talked about, that might help them come up with a story as they sort of thinking about their story throughout the conference and after?
Absolutely. That is, telling your own story can be so powerful, but it also makes you vulnerable, right? I think folks in the scientific community and veterinarians, doctors, whatever, are sometimes the most reluctant because they're so used to talking about the science and data. Goodness gracious, now you want me to talk about myself, right? But we know that society has moved to a tribal society, right? It used to be that we respected voices of authority. Now we respect voices that we can relate to and that we have built trust with. So if you're able to say, Andy, well, I'm a dad first, and nothing is more important to me than feeding my kids safe food. I would never do anything otherwise. And let me tell you a little bit about what I know about antibiotics in meat. Right there, you open the door to another parent who says, oh, this guy isn't just some really smart university dude. He actually cares about what I care about. So terribly important.
Great. Well, thank you so much for those insights. I'm sure other people will have questions. To everyone, to all of our many participants who are now in the room, there'll be a time for Q&A afterwards in breakout rooms. And so in respect of time, I'm going to thank you, Terri, and we'll come back later. And I'm going to move on to our next presenter, Claire Masker-King. And I'm so impressed when the slides come up like right after saying something. And so Claire's representing the National Pork Board. She's the Director of Sustainability Communications, leads sustainability communications planning, assists with both issues management and proactive media relations outreach. And she serves as the communication liaison to the international marketing staff. I know I just read everything that everyone else can read, but I figured just in case you were kind of have the window closed, I would go through that. And so Claire, I'm going to turn things over to you to have you talk about some of the efforts that you've been doing, and I'll probably have a couple questions after to expand on things. So over to you.
Well, thank you, Andy, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time this afternoon to listen to our panel. We know that more than ever before, consumers have questions about how their food is raised, and that includes questions about antibiotic use on livestock farms. And for us in the agriculture industry, that means a greater responsibility to answer those questions. As staff at the National Pork Board, we hear those questions and concerns, and we're committed to helping consumers understand how antibiotics are used on pig farms across the country. One of the ways that we've done that in the past several years is through farm tours. We've been able to have over 200 influencers join us on farm tours across the country over the past several years on about 20 farms. These influencers include public health officials, social media influencers, media, and registered dietitians. And we really believe that we work hard to create an on-farm experience that helps tell that story. So on the next slide, I'll talk about our goal. And our goal is really just to create an experience that builds a better understanding of the better understanding of responsible pig farming. And so we invite influencers about 10 to 12 at a time so that they can get an on-farm experience and get into a farm and learn more about how pigs are raised today. We make sure that we try to keep these farm tours small because we really believe in that one-to-one experience and that one-to-one interaction with farmers, veterinarians, and their staff. And we really focus on influencers in either the social media space or public health officials, because we want them to be able to feel confident in answering the questions. As Terri talked about, we're really in that tribal communication period, and we trust our influencers. We have research that shows that some Gen Zers actually believe that the individuals they follow on YouTube know them better than their friends or family. And so we want to reach out and work with influencers, and we think that's important and a good investment of our farm's time. On the next slide, I'll talk about our 4 keys to success. We believe that when it comes to farm tours, we have 4 keys that include preparation, communication, transparency, and expertise. For preparation, we work really one-on-one with our farms that are hosting these tours to help them feel prepared for the farm tour. This includes pre-farm tours, as well as walking through potential questions that might be asked and how they could answer them, where they show their values first. Communication, we really communicate openly with our farm tour participants. If you've ever been on a farm tour and been on a sow farm, that means you probably have to shower in. And that's usually a question that people have. And so we always make sure that we explain the process. We're showering in to keep the pigs healthy, especially those baby piglets that are born every day on farms across the country. It's so important for us to keep them healthy. And that's our first step in using antibiotics responsibly, is if we can keep our animals healthy, then there's a less need for us to use antibiotics down the road. We also make sure that when we shower in, we have kits for them all to use and shower in. And so they're not having to look for different sizes. They're able to provide the sizes that they need and wear the clothes that they need on the other side. When it comes to transparency, we really believe in an open and transparent storytelling that happens on the farm. No question is off limits for our influencers to ask. And we also make sure that we let the farmers know that they can feel open to answering those questions for themselves. And then finally, our fourth key to success is expertise. When we talk about expertise, we're talking about making sure that we know that farmers don't farm alone. We have a full team of staff that helps us, from veterinarians to agronomists, that help us make sure that we're using manure correctly on farms. And when we see this ability to bring those experts on the farm and learn more, and they can learn, and our influencers can learn from those experts, they know that we're doing what's right on the farm. And this is incredibly important when we talk about antibiotics use, and they realize how important it is that we work hand in hand with our veterinarians to use antibiotics responsibly when they're needed on the farm. And this allows us to create once-in-a-lifetime experiences for our farm tour participants. I'm going to introduce you to Kirsten, and this is probably one of my most favorite photos I've ever taken on a farm. And if you don't know what Kirsten's doing, Kirsten is assisting a sow in delivery. When we're able to have our 4 keys of success, we break down those barriers. Kirsten didn't grow up on a farm, and she's actually a food blogger from Michigan. And the first time she was able to assist a sow and help bring a piglet into the world, she was super excited, and you could see that emotion on her face. But if we didn't make sure that we were prepared and communicated, offered transparency, and had those expertise on the farm, then we wouldn't be able to allow those individuals to feel that they can come onto the farm and assist a sow in delivery. And this really helps when it comes to our outcome. One of the things that we are passionate about at the National Pork Board is for our farm tours is having a pre and a post survey for our individuals that come on the farm. One of the questions, as you can see in a recent farm tour, was, what is your opinion on how pig farmers use antibiotics on their farms to treat pigs? The blue shows what we were before, and the orange is what after. And as you can see, we moved a majority of the individuals who we had on the farm to extremely favorable about how we use antibiotics on the farm. And you'll read along with me. One of the examples I had from the survey is, I get it, 100%. Antibiotics are used sparingly and only when necessary to ensure the pig's comfort and health, but antibiotics do not make it into the food chain for us as consumers. This is a powerful statement, knowing that we were able to use all of the steps and how we prepare for a farm tour and working with our influencers to make sure that we can have a difference. And on the final slide, here's a couple photos that we've had of farm tour over the years. As you can tell, we're interacting with farm staff. We're asking questions. They ask the tough questions, and we're open and honest and transparent in how we answer them. And this is an example of one of our social media influencers who was on a tour that said, having seen the entire operation and been alongside the farmers as they did their jobs, I can confidently say that all the pigs were healthy. And I stand behind these farmers and their method. It makes me feel good about where my food comes from. this social media influencer that posted this afterwards and had great things to say about her. We didn't ask her to post this on her own social media channels. She did this herself. And I think it shows the positivity that we're able to have and how she's able to help share our story out. We use influencers because we feel that they're so much better able to tell their story to the mass consumer audience, or when it comes to public health officials, that they're able to sit down and have those tough discussions with us and these experiences in mind. And so we're just very proud of our farm tour program. We do have some virtual tours that we've done over the years as well, but we feel we're most impactful with our on-farm tours. And I think a lot of us can say that with some of the virtual events that we've been over in the past several months with our pandemic. So with that, I will turn it back to Andy.
Thanks, Claire. So what immediately comes to mind, really interesting, and it sounds like very successful tours that you're doing for your organization. How do you select influencers? And so that's, I think, such an interesting thing, because when we talk about audiences, and something that we touched a little bit on in sort of wrapping up last year's symposium, was that you just aren't going to reach everybody that you want to reach, right? Some people are not reachable for a message about animal agriculture in general. And so when you go through that selection process, what does that process look like, and how much influence does an influencer have for them to interest?
Mm-hmm. Well, it really depends on our audience. So we've focused a lot recently on public health officials and dietitians. We know that registered dietitians especially are getting more and more questions about how animals are raised, especially those dietitians that are in grocery stores, and they're kind of that front line of defense. And so we want to provide them with the resources that they need. Public health officials, Dr. Heather Fowler has really brought us on to that scene, really, with how do we work with them and influence them and bring them on farms. When it comes to social media influencers, we kind of do a macro and a micro influencer. So sometimes micro influencers can actually have a bigger impact with their audience than the macro influencers might have, who have a bigger following. But really, we look for those middle of the road individuals. If they're against animal agriculture, we can't have a conversation. If they're against eating meat, it's not someone that we're going to be able to have a positive conversation with. But if they're middle of the road and want to learn more, just want to learn more so that they can understand.
I am not sure if I'm cut off or if Claire is cut off.
We can
Andy,
still
I think
hear you.
we lost Claire. Yes.
Okay. Well, I was enjoying the beginning of that answer, and I imagine we can pick up the end of that answer in a little bit. Hopefully she's able to get back on. Other questions that came to mind that maybe I'll get the chance to ask later will just be about thinking about some of the training for the tour guides. It looks like there's a question also in the chat about a particular instance from a 60-minute segment from 2015 that perhaps can be asked, that we can ask Claire in breakout room later. But for now, we'll just simply transition into our next speaker. And so one of the things that the way that the panel is set up and how everything was sort of looked at is the goal was to start with that sort of overview of last year and what we've done for the NIAA symposium in the past. And thinking about sort of communication and improving communication about antibiotic resistance and antimicrobial stewardship in all of its forms. And today, obviously, we heard from Terri about some of the historical perspective, as well as some of the current best practices. We just heard from Claire about one particular outlet and one particular audience, as well as a particular outcome of interest to people working in animal agriculture. But then there's another element to this that is important to consider, and it's one that we sort of assume, I guess, when we have universities participating in the way that we did at Iowa State last year, but one that I think can be sort of clarified in a useful way to think about how does academia translate to industry practice, and how are those things related, and how is the industry studied in academia? And so for that, Dr. Courtney Myers is joining us this year from Texas Tech University. She's a professor in agricultural communications and also serves as the graduate studies coordinator for the Ag Ed and Com department. She teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in web design, public relations writing, and online media strategy, and has received several teaching awards at the college, university, and national levels. Courtney and I have known each other for a number of years, back to when I was a faculty member at Texas Tech, and I'm thrilled she's joining us today. So Courtney, I'll turn things over to you, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. I'm thrilled to get to speak to how we can connect academia and the industry, or more specifically, what the potential is for agricultural communications, education, and research. So to get things started, here's a picture of me in my natural habitat. I am a professor, and these are the types of courses I teach. I also deal with a lot of research and have the blessing really to work with a lot of graduate students who are exploring issues, a lot of things around the social sciences of communicating complex agricultural topics. So today I want to address a project in each of these areas. And the first one I want to share is something that we did related to teaching. So about 5 years ago, I got a grant with some co-PIs from the USDA to develop multimedia case studies about controversial agricultural issues. And one of them is on antibiotics in animal agriculture. And this project, I have the address here on the slide. It's available publicly. These materials have been integrated in more than 10 universities nationwide. And I use it in my Communicating Agriculture to the Public course. So let me go back. There we go. In this case study, what we're trying to do is help our students recognize the problem. It's interesting hearing the other presenters talk about influencers and introducing people to the farm. We have a lot of students who come from the Metroplex area or from the Houston area who don't have the benefit of being raised on a farm. And so for them, a lot of this is exploring the issue and understanding the terminology around it. Then we dive into the sources of scientific controversy. Why is this even a concern? And we take that in a number of ways, and I'm going to introduce that to you. We also spend some time looking at risk processing theories and how we can provide information all day long. People still rely on emotions to make some choices. So the sources of controversy, we've actually have heard a few of them today, and we break these down into 4 main areas. One of them is a fundamental scientific controversy, which really doesn't exist with this issue, but with other science topics, there might be a point of contention. Where we get into some areas of debate or controversy is starting with the second one. Who's to blame? Who is the main culprit? This is a secondary scientific controversy, and this is where a lot of communication centers. So we spend some time talking about, do we blame our pets, domestic animals, and their use of antibiotics? Do we look to the livestock industry, or are we part of the problem and the use of antibiotics for human health? And many times students haven't really thought about the issue in that perspective. Another thing we do is talk about the application of antibiotics. And Terri brought up that point about if we can preserve antibiotic use for certain things like therapeutic uses to keep animals healthy, can we give up other uses such as growth promotion? And we talk through that in the class. This is an agricultural communications course, so we center a lot of time on this last point, which is the conflict between this idea, the scientific idea, and the non-scientific viewpoint. And some consumers actually believe that they are eating antibiotics if they eat meat that has been raised with antibiotic use. And then we also talk about the influence of food marketing and absence labeling, which focuses on what is not in a product. And it's really the first time students have thought about what they see on food packages and what they see in food marketing and how that might influence consumers who don't have that other understanding. One of the things we've talked about today is the audience and knowing your audience. And that certainly comes down to demographic characteristics that you could check on a census. But then there's those tougher things to get out, those more unique psychographics such as values, opinions, and feelings. So for this case study, we talked to the students about risk information processing theories. And these are two of them, the affect heuristic and risk as feelings hypothesis. And I don't want this to turn into a lecture, but this is a really interesting time for us to talk about the role of information and feelings and emotions and how people process that and how they go about making choices based on that. If you've seen the movie Inside Out, that's what this picture's from. I like to use that to help my students make that connection. But more importantly for you and for this case, these theories point at how people may think about the topic. For many of you, veterinarians and farmers, you have direct experience helping animals get better through the use of antibiotics. That's a very vivid thing for you. You know that providing antibiotics makes them feel better, keeps them healthy. And you're aware of the science. You know the difference between antibiotic and antimicrobial. But for general consumers, they don't have that vivid connection. And most of the experience they might have is mediated through media coverage, which, you know, isn't going to play up everything's great today. It's only covering those unique circumstances. And the benefits of using it on the farm are not known. So that's my education example. So my research example is, I want to highlight a dissertation that a former doctoral student completed. Garrett Steed is now at the University of Minnesota as an assistant professor. And in his dissertation, we looked at this topic and how online and traditional media are presenting information and discussing it through 3 phases. And I'm going to quickly go through this. But the first one is looking at Twitter content analysis. And Claire mentioned the role of social media influencers. So we looked at Twitter coverage in a very short amount of time and identified who were the influencers. And I love that idea of a macro versus micro influencer. We looked at those who had the biggest followership and were tweeting the most content. And we found that 7 of the top 10 had no scientific credentials and were not sharing positive content in light of the livestock industry's use of antibiotics. The second phase was looking at newspaper coverage, and this covered a wider time frame, 21 years, and the coverage in 3 national newspapers. And we were really curious about the role of science communication in this coverage. And we found that many of them did have science. So 27% had a government scientist cited and quoted, but nearly 42% had no scientific sources. So reliance on accuracy of information may not be reaching the end user through these media outlets alone. Probably not a surprise. I know I'm pushing through this a little bit quickly, but I really want to get time to wrap up. But we also looked at how the conversation is framed in the media coverage. And this is just the main lens or the main way that it's being described or defined. And we had 3 main frames. Change, recognizing that the industry is trying to change, that we're trying to do things. Blame, we heard blame earlier on the panel about, is the livestock industry to blame? And then the human impact, what is the human role in this issue? So blame was predominantly the main frame, but we found that although 40% of newspapers did not contain a scientific source, that doesn't mean they weren't great materials. It may have been an opinion piece. It may have been another style of writing. But what's more troubling is that misinformation abounds. And there is this 80% flawed FDA figure that is sometimes circulated about how many, what percentage of antibiotics are used in factory farms. And that was found in a quarter of the articles in our study. And I already mentioned the blame frame. So we put this together with an experiment. We had nearly 300 people who saw a mock Twitter page framed in one of these ways. And so it would be like if your organization was consistently providing information in a similar vein. And so these are examples of those, and my slide deck will be available later so you can look at that. But the bad news is that what we found was that people who saw the blame frame were most likely to change their opinion, meaning that they trusted that information when the livestock industry was framed as the culprit. However, they were most likely to seek information. So this is a promising area for communication where if you can present it as, you may have heard this, however, this is the actual case, that might be an avenue in. So some overall recommendations, and I think these are supported from the other presenters, is using social media monitoring to know what's being said and who's saying it will be beneficial. Targeting information for your audience's needs. I'm going to mention that a little bit in my final thoughts. Using scientific sources, definitely when it's appropriate. And then communicate the great things that the livestock industry, that animal agriculture is doing, such as helping animals feel better, to prevent pain and suffering, to highlight new developments and how you're using scientific progress, and then emphasizing the positive impact of the VFD's final rule and what difference that has made for the industry. So my final thoughts, Andy asked me to wrap it up with a couple final thoughts, and I'll tell you the same thing I tell my students. It starts, all communication should focus on two things: your audience and your purpose. And you should keep those in mind anytime you're developing communications materials, to make sure that you're conveying the right key messages to the right people in a way that they can achieve the outcome, the behavioral or attitudinal outcomes that you wanted. All right, thank you.
Sorry, I was muted there and I started talking. Hi, thank you, Courtney. Appreciate it. And I know people have a chance to ask some questions in the breakout room, and so I'm just going to, because of time, let that happen. I want to wrap things up myself and just say a few things before I turn it over to JJ and we figure out how to get everybody into the rooms they're interested in going into. But first of all, again, I want to thank all of our speakers, Terri, Claire, Courtney, for sharing their perspectives and sharing their experiences. Claire, I know that we lost you there during the Q&A, but hopefully people can follow up in the breakout rooms. But one of the things I just want to say to all of our participants as we go through the rest of the symposium tomorrow and on Wednesday, the rest of today for that matter, is that thinking about some of the things that we talked about and thinking about the sort of aspects of communicating about antimicrobial stewardship that are most interesting to you and are most important to your organization or to the stakeholders that you represent. How are some of the things that we've talked about today apply across that sort of one health spectrum of ideas, from talking about animal agriculture, which is really a big focus of the communication session, and is obviously a big focus of the symposium, but also human health and environmental health. And there are different challenges at communicating about antimicrobial stewardship across those three domains. And so there's already some good discussion in the chat. I hope that can continue on to the breakout rooms, and I'll turn things over to JJ, who will explain how we're breaking things out. I look forward to hearing the rest of the sessions the last couple of days and to give some communication thoughts as we finish up later in the week. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy. And thank you everyone of our panelists for great comments and knowledge to kick off the 10th annual Antibiotic Symposium. So as Andy just mentioned, here in just a moment, we are going to open the breakout rooms, and you'll have 4 breakout rooms to choose from. One, Claire Masker-King will be in talking about influencer relations. We'll also have Courtney Myers talking about additional research. So I know I saw, like Andy did, some questions for Courtney, so that'll be a great space to ask those questions. Terri Moore will be talking about her experiences and guidance in media and government communications. And then Morgan Young, who serves as our Director of Communications and Outreach for the National Institute for Animal Agriculture, will be talking about social media. So as Courtney talked about, utilizing social media platforms as a way to engage with different audiences. As Courtney talked about, as you think about who your audiences are and what your purpose is as it relates to responsible antibiotic use and antimicrobial resistance. All 4 of these breakout rooms will be a chance for you to engage with our panelists. So if your Zoom is updated to the latest version, when we open the breakout rooms here momentarily, you will have the option to select the breakout room you want to go into. You can also switch breakout rooms. So if you have multiple questions for multiple panelists, you can do that. Or if for some reason your Zoom has not been updated recently and it's not giving you that option, you'll remain in the main room and you can let me know and I can get you into the room that you would like. So with that, bear with me as we let technology work its session. So breakout room 1 will be with Claire, breakout 2 will be with Courtney, breakout 3 will be with Terri, and breakout 4 will be with Morgan. So I am going to open the rooms now, and you can begin selecting the breakout room you would like to enjoy conversation in, and we will open back up and bring everybody back together at 3:30. So head into those breakout rooms, and we will see you again at 3:30. Okay. So Claire.
She got back on, didn't she?
Yes. You're in your room, right?
Yeah, nobody else is.
JJ, your sound's still on.
I just saw that. Thank you.
JJ, you might want to repeat the instructions for everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Dorman. So if you are
How are you?
not seeing a breakout room option, please chat with me and send me which room you would like to be in. If you do have the option to select your own room, breakout room 1 will be with Claire Masker King talking about influencer relations. Breakout room 2 will be with Dr. Courtney Myers talking about communication research. Breakout room 3 will be with Terri Moore, media and government communications, and breakout room 4 will be with Morgan Young on social media. So I am working my way through those of you who have sent me a request, and I will get you assigned as quickly as possible.
Well, that's okay. Yeah, leave that conversation. So you are from Dane County Extension, right? Gotcha. Got it. Yeah. Well, we're glad you did. So what all do you do with Dane County? Or what do you do in both of your roles? So which one do you spend the most social time on?
JJ, you're still unmuted.
Mm-hmm.
Let's unmute and, yep.
Hopefully we have a few people still with us. I know that JJ is trying to get everybody into breakout rooms. I know some people can't. I know I don't have the ability to choose a breakout room, but Eric and I are here kind of hanging out, and we're just going to chit chat a little bit as everybody's in the breakout rooms, and we'll have our own happy hour. Eric, you drinking anything good?
I am drinking water right now.
Funny.
Yeah, though.
Yeah, how boring is that, right?
Good, clean water. So if anybody wants to jump on or even flip on their video,
Flip on your video cameras, if you will. So hopefully we can see who's here.
I'm trying to. I may have to have JJ open that up for us to see.
Flip on your video camera and say hello. Isn't that what happy hour is?
Yeah. That is.
Hey guys, this is Rick. I just turned on my, the video isn't working.
He may have it shut off. You may have to allow it.
We can see your video as you're talking.
You can see me. See you.
You can see the top of my head. I'm in my classroom.
Yeah, you have to talk in order to be seen on the video. So unless you switch options.
That is why Leah and I are always on the video.
Because we never stop talking.
That's right.
You expect us to argue with that?
No.
Not at all. No, we just expect you to be jealous at times, Rick.
Yeah.
On there.
Well, yeah,
But to that point, Rick, so and to everyone on the call, one question that came up in my mind of all these great tools we have and processes we have, like the 4 keys to success, what does everyone think is the main thing that makes a message stick? How do you actually influence the audience to make a difference? Is there a secret to it? Is there a secret sauce we have? What's everyone's thoughts? We have 25 other people on here still. Anybody have any thoughts or anything they gleaned from our conversation today?
Well, I guess I can start and say simply that through experience, until they trust you, you don't have a chance. It doesn't really matter if the audience is small or big. I have more than one situation where I thought the message was good and we were connecting, but you don't build trust, it doesn't happen. Comments?
Yeah, that's funny you say that, Rick, because and it fits, I totally agree with you. When they brought up the 4 keys to success, preparation, communications, transparency, and expertise, all those, if done correctly, lead to build trust, in my mind, on that. Those are all keys to building trust. So I would agree with that. Anybody else have any comments?
I think building trust is always the goal. And one of the things Terri talked about, and I've certainly talked about a lot, is lead with your values. You know, one of the ways a lot of the activists, others, or our special friends, as you might call them, that maybe don't care for animal agriculture, they're really, really good at sharing an emotional kind of message. And we have that ability. We have the ability to tap into those emotions and utilize those in talking about what we do and why we do it that way. So one of the things I often utilize or try to remember to utilize, sometimes it's harder because it's not natural, and that is leading with your values, like Terri talked about.
A point of reference. It seems that it's harder for guys to sort of go down that path than ladies. Talk about that for a second.
Okay, so the ladies do have a little bit of an advantage there.
Understatement of the century.
But it depends on it also in part depends on your audience. I could argue the guys have some advantage some other ways.
Hey guys, Lucas here. How are you?
Jump in, Lucas.
I don't have anything to say much yet
Come on.
for a change, but I just wanted to say hello.
Well, great.
I have a question that has sort of been gnawing at me from Terri's point of view. I think she had the nail on the head, but frequently in the last 2 or 3 years since retirement, I've hung out with a lot of MDs, and very, very frequently, they have no clue what a withdrawal is. For how is that possible that the medical community is sort of not in that information space? Because it's a really big deal when they're giving advice about food safety, food security. Now, it doesn't happen so much with the public health folks. Public health folks have a better handle on it. But the rest of the medical community, they don't get any training, it seems, or very little training about this whole idea of withdrawal of antibiotics in the food sector.
So are you asking how we get that information to them?
I'm trying to figure out, can we make a difference there? Can we help that out? Because in the One Health spectrum, we have to be sort of on the same page in a lot of places. And one of the things that's particularly important in the space of, is our food safe? Is it secure? Is it adding to AMR? Is it really strong understanding on their side of the aisle about withdrawals and the opportunity for food to be, or for animals to get antibiotics and still have little to no antibiotics available in the food? Is that a question that's got everybody perplexed or what?
Well, I think it's like anything else. You don't know what you don't know.
I was dumbfounded. The first 2 or 3 times I thought it was specific to the personalities, and then it just became the norm, and I was just dumbfounded.
Well, I think it goes a little bit to Spencer's comment there. I think, Rick, in what pathway would we expect them to get that information? I mean, what part of their curriculum, what part of their education does that fit into, that we could, if we can identify that, then we can insert the information there. But if I look at an MD's education and their training is focused on individual medicine, it's focused on whatever their specialty is, what would be the pathway to get that information to them? You know, outside of you talking to them or us reaching out in One Health kind of arena, I'm just trying to think where that would fit in their education. And I don't know, maybe it does and we're missing out.
I think you're on target. I don't think there is any sort of space in their education for that kind of information transfer. What I was sort of hinting at is in the genre of One Health, and we're moving in that direction, multiple spaces. There are some things that we got to be really careful we don't take for granted. And when we're setting across the discussion on a panel, or we're setting across the discussion on a policy sort of scenario with MDs, that we together are trying to allow antibiotics to be used well going forward in the future, not overused, but used well, they're under the understanding, when I start or when we have a conversation about withdrawals, it is very much a blank stare. It is just not something that they had considered. And to say that seems preposterous is sort of the way I feel in that moment. How could that happen?
Well, I think you're going down the right path. I'll even circle back to Spencer's comment again. We're getting over the point of being defensive on our use of antibiotics, and we're, instead of to justify every move, we know what we use them for, how they're being used, and they, again, that group of people wouldn't have any understanding of the actual use of our antibiotics in our system. And so having that conversation without having to be put on the defense of those conversations you're having, Rick, about, hey, you really just need to be educated. You just need the information on that is what they're lacking.
Well, yeah, but that's a yelling that.
Yeah.
I'm
That's
laughing, Eric. I'm laughing
where
because
that's where Leah,
if you start out the conversation with an MD as a veterinarian and look an MD in the eye and say, you just need to be educated, I can guarantee that's a show.
I do that with my brother all the time.
There's a genetic
Eric.
that allows the sort of camaraderie.
And then it turns into a whole different argument.
But ultimately, you need to realize, Troy, that I was going to say that ultimately, you know, MDs are consumers, right? So do we need to approach them as a consumer with a little bit of more science knowledge? But, you know, it's a consumer ultimately. They don't really know what's going on in animal agriculture.
Yeah, and I would say it's also probably pretty dependent on the MD you talk to. So if you talk to somebody who specializes in maternal child health and it's a nursing mom, they are acutely, or a physician caring for a nursing mom, they're actually very acutely aware of some of the, you know, dietary restrictions and medical restrictions and medications that can and cannot be taken. And so I think it is a little bit of a paradigm shift in that with many of our human colleagues, they are not necessarily, when they're looking at their patient, they're not expecting their patient to become a food commodity or to produce a food commodity, and therefore thinking about some of the you know, potential withdrawal times or other things there. So I do think it's a paradigm shift. And if you can connect to some level of foundational knowledge there that you share to say, well, you know, there's a reason that when our cows are milking and producing milk for the supply that we have a withdrawal time. So those receiving antibiotics are not being milked for the food supply. And then you say, just as though it were, you know, a nursing mom and she's not taking certain medications that could potentially end up in her milk and transfer to the baby. Sometimes those connections are made and there's a kind of a place of common ground. I know that always helps me, especially if I'm presenting to different audiences.
So Megan, what you described was, I think that was Megan. I hope it was. I may just misspoke.
It is.
What you described was when Andy King started out his talk about some learnings we had from the previous symposium is segmenting those audiences within audiences and really identifying what that conversation just had, what type of conversation, as you just described, you have to have with that segment you're looking at. And so all MDs as a whole, I know if we talk to surgeons, orthopedic surgeons are going to be a different conversation than the family physician, you know, than the OBGYN, so that's another thing that was brought up in the beginning of our discussion.
Eric, I want to ask another question, and that is from kind of the animal perspective and thinking about One Health. Do you believe that One Health tends to be more a veterinary term, or is this something that MDs, and maybe Megan, you can jump in and help answer this too, are MDs really grabbing a hold of this and saying, hey, yes, this is the right way to talk about some of these issues? And maybe Megan's ignoring me now.
I am thinking about that actually. You know, so I have to say I've been to there have been one of the schools that I was recently presenting at, so Lincoln Memorial University, they have an interprofessional education program where students from their medical, veterinary, pharmacy, and I think it's undergrad and maybe nursing, but they all come together for a symposium each year, and there's activities outside of the classroom too, because I don't know about you, but the time I think I bond most in an interprofessional settings with my colleagues is not necessarily in the learning environment, but outside, you know, grabbing a cup of coffee, standing in line for lunch, the networking sessions. And so they encourage this type of networking among the students by having them interview each other, and they get prizes, and they do a race together. And it was fascinating to me to see that it can be done, and in a way that promotes the One Health concept and holistic medicine and kind of all these principles that are synergistic across the schools. But it seems to take a tremendous effort. I don't know about many medical colleges that are specifically teaching One Health, but I'm always cautiously optimistic that it'll catch on. Maybe under interprofessional education, it can be furthered.
Well, this is Sue Duran at Auburn. We have a DO school here, and I'm a pharmacist, and the vet school. We have a huge One Health group, and we also have funding for research projects, and we have sponsors at night, and they furnish some food. And you know, young people are always going to come if you have a good meal, so we have really good programs. And we have had antimicrobial panels from the veterinarians and the pharmacists and the physicians. So we're very active. Of course, we're a big agriculture school, but it is. And we also have environmentalists. We have a big forestry department and water. So we are One Health here. Trying not to get COVID. That's our goal right now.
That's a fantastic example.
Yeah, so Leah, I think maybe that's one of those things where the fact that we both look at it as One Health being more veterinary oriented might give us a little different perception of the One Health concept that doesn't necessarily line up with an MD's perception of One Health. And they may be having the same conversations as One Health only human health related. I mean, so maybe we just haven't fully integrated across those lines yet.
And I think for what I've been reading, you know, about the current pandemic, I think we have a good opportunity, and I think people are really understanding what our interrelation with, you know, animals and people and plants and the environment is. So I think is gaining a little bit of momentum.
Well,
Hey everyone. It's Dawn Seaver from CDC. Can you hear me?
Hey, Dawn.
Yeah, Dawn.
Hey, Dawn.
Go ahead.
Hey. So I just wanted to say hi. I haven't seen everyone in a while. Yeah, and I guess one of my thoughts on that is, and Eric, I know that people are still sort of saying that the incorrect view of One Health is that it's all about humans and how everything else affects humans, when really it should be the equivalent triangle where everything, humans, animals, environment, all affect each other. And I think when perhaps from the medical side, on the human side, you think, how does something affect my patient or humans? It sort of diminishes the meaning of One Health because it takes it off that equivalent balance. And it makes it all about humans. One Health is how everything affects humans. And that's not what we want. It's not what we mean. We really mean, how is everything equivalent and affecting each other? And so I think that I think that the schools that have the strong veterinary schools with medical schools and they're agricultural based, I think those are the ones that are moving forward, as the examples show, where they're the ones that to take that holistic view of what One Health truly means and what we want it to mean, versus the other schools that may be sitting behind, or that we do need to reach out to MDs and say, we need to look at this in a different way and get them more involved in that. And I think if they're not pulled in where they are because of the way, you know, because the ag is strong, the vet is strong, and they get pulled in it, I think there still is that off balanced view of One Health means how everything affects humans. And I think we do need to change that view and slide them more to that equivalent triangle.
Dawn, I have a question on that, because I think you're right. how do we get, what's the galvanizing target, if that's the right term, that links humans and veterinarians and maybe the environment equally together? Because what you're asking is, how do we identify and play off of that sort of galvanizing target that everybody understands is equal across all three sectors? Because that's where we get stuck.
Yeah,
Go
no,
ahead,
it's a
Dawn.
great question.
Hey, I
was gonna
just,
say, I don't think I have an answer, but we're looking for that answer. Sorry, Leah.
no, I just wanted that, sorry to interrupt, Dawn, you're cutting out on my end and maybe I'm cutting out on yours, but everybody's going to be joining the big breakout here, the main room here in just a few minutes. So I think everybody's going to be jumping back in. So continue on. I just wanted to warn you if you heard some folks stumbling in.
Well, I'll tell you again, at Auburn, we have the veterinarian is the vice president at the DO School for Research, and we have a new president, or a president that's been here a while, and he basically has interdepartmental positions. So we have veterinarians that have positions at the pharmacy school and some DO school and engineering school. So I think we're hiring interdisciplinary positions, 2 or more departments. Engineering's big here, and I think that's in the last 4 years, and we've had a better outcome in research and everything, because we get together in big groups and you can write some really good grants and get good ideas if you have multiple disciplinarians. And the forestry people monitor the water, so we're very we have a lot of problems with the water, so they've really cleaned the water up. So we're really happy with our new president's approach to interdepartmental groups. Hey, Lucius, how you doing?
So I think we have everybody's back in from our breakout rooms. Leah, welcome back. I think everybody hopefully had a great discussion on there. And we also, for those of you that stayed on the large room, you heard a lot of talk about One Health and some carry on communications, but you also heard Dr. Nichols talk about those times that we have when we are standing in line for coffee, when we're in the break, when we're in the networking events. All those things that go back are key to the success of expanding your horizon, meeting new people, and then building your knowledge base around yourself to become more informed and provide knowledge to other people as well. So that goes back to the comment about we need to educate the MDs, Leah, that was taken.
Now, what did I tell you about that, Eric?
Yeah, well,
Just
that's
have a
not
conversation.
have a conversation. That's
educate.
just because my brother's one, and that's the way I talk to him. So I got to learn to understand my audience, and that
Indeed.
and
especially not related to you.
Yeah. So with that, I want to, as we're getting back and we're waiting on to enter into the social hour here shortly, I wanted to kind of try and bring it back together for everybody. And I would challenge everyone on the call right now to think about a time that you had a very positive communication event, a positive communication about antimicrobial stewardship, antimicrobial resistance with an audience you don't typically talk to. And as you picture that in your mind, think about another time in the last year where it didn't go so well. It wasn't the outcome you wanted. Now I want you to go back and replay the speakers that we just had in your head and see if you can identify any key points to success, any key terms, thoughts, processes that may have been the difference in those two conversations. It would be one way to look back and try and think about what you heard today and then work it to how you could apply it by making mistakes in the past or making successes in the past. And so I'd encourage everyone to go back and think through that process. Lee, anything to add to that?
No, other than, you know, it's happy hour and you've just given us about 4 things to think about all at the same time. And so, you know, that's kind of a lot.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Well, that's true.
But no, I think you make great points, Eric. I think there was some really, really good discussions here this afternoon, and I think there are some really good takeaways, and we're not going to go over all of those by any stretch of the means, but I do want you to think about what you heard and how you might be able to actually go forward and apply that to what you do and to some of the interactions and the communications that you have in whether it's your daily work or whether that's when you're hanging out at the volleyball game or wherever you might be.
And so speaking of hanging out, now it's time for our happy hour. So we'd like to officially welcome everyone that we have. It'll be a little different process that we'll go through. And Leah will cover the breakout rooms here in a second. But first, we would like to invite Hugh Sandberg from the Cattlemen's Beef Board to provide a few opening comments for us. We appreciate their support and their involvement in the discussion. And I know they're a leader in this group. So Hugh, would you take it away?
Absolutely. And thank you, Eric and Leah, for inviting us to join you today. I'm Hugh Sandberg. I'm vice chair of the Cattlemen's Beef Board. I'm a cow-calf producer and a seed stock producer in Western Colorado near a small town named Eckerd. It's my pleasure to be here to help you to celebrate 10 important years of this symposium. The Beef Checkoff is fortunate to be a leading supporter of the annual NIAA Antibiotic Symposium. Farmers and ranchers are feeling pressure like never before around the perceived links between antimicrobial resistance in humans and food animals. And they have been working hard to engage in meaningful conversations with influencers and consumers. Livestock producers around the country work hard every day to maintain the health of the animals they care for. Therefore, farmers and ranchers must be engaged in the conversations that are framing future initiatives that impact antibiotic use, and be empowered with the knowledge, skills, and resources that will allow their voices and, most importantly, their values and experiences to be heard amongst the noise of the less informed voices. The Beef Checkoff's purpose, outlined by law, is to provide promotion, research, and education around all things beef, creating a desire or demand, if you will, for our product among consumers. Consumers want to know more about their food than perhaps at any time in history. They want to know how it was raised, what it has been fed, what's been done to keep the animal healthy, so they can be confident in their choice of beef as a protein-packed powerhouse in their everyday diet. The Beef Checkoff's role in supporting the mission of NIAA and the gathering of both animal and human health doctors, companies, and organizations is vital to continue to give consumers the information they desire and to provide healthy animals and healthy humans in the future. If you would like to learn more about the research and other projects being funded by farmers and ranchers investments through the Cattlemen's Beef Board, I'd invite you to visit drivingdemandforbeef.com. Again, that's drivingdemandforbeef.com. Once again, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to visit with you today, and best of luck to the NIAA Antibiotic Symposium here in 2020. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Leah.
No, Hugh, thank you so much for those words. And I definitely agree with you. farmers are certainly a wonderful asset, and those are the folks that farmers and ranchers are really the people who consumers already naturally trust. And as long as they're being transparent, they're an excellent spokesperson. So couldn't agree with you more, but really appreciate your support and the Cattlemen's Beef Board support of the NIAA Symposium. We're going to do something a little bit different. So we're going to actually move to some breakout rooms, but the good news is we're going to move for you. So you're going to be automatically assigned. If you would turn on your videos, that way when you're talking, we can see your face and we know who we're talking to besides just that little name on the screen. So if you would turn on your videos, but you're going to be randomly assigned to a room. So in just a few minutes, they'll randomly move you to a breakout room, and it'll be a small breakout. But first, we're going to get a discussion questions. So you'll have about 10 minutes in the breakout room. You'll get maybe a 1-minute warning, and then you're going to go back into the main meeting room where we are now. So they're going to move you automatically back and forth. So hang with us. And our first topic is, what is the most embarrassing thing you've seen on live webinars or video meetings? So what's the most embarrassing thing you've seen on live webinars or video meetings? So we're going to move to breakouts, and then we'll have a quick debrief when we come back. So we'll maybe take 10 minutes or so.
Everyone is expected to talk.
And you will probably have to, the host is inviting you to a join breakout room. So it'll give you a room number. Just click on join.
Greetings, everybody. Are we all back, JJ?
You've got just a couple folks who are coming back in, so
Great.
it looks like it just shut down. So yep, I believe you.
Hey, we're back.
Awesome. Well, hopefully everybody got to meet somebody and learn something funny about Zoom calls or webinars. Now we're going to shuffle everybody up again. And we have another question to go through your group, introduce yourselves again. You'll meet new people. And then we want to talk about what questions are you hearing about or being asked about antibiotic use and resistance, and how are you answering them?
Hey, before we go there, do we want to debrief at all?
Well, okay. Was that one of your things on the webinars you saw or what?
Yeah. Yeah, I think people should share.
Okay. Anybody have one they want to share? Unmute yourself and jump in. So if you have someone else in your group that you'd like to volunteer, that would be appropriate too.
That would be Spencer.
Hello all. So in late February, when work from home became permanent across the country in a significant way, we had our very first all-company Zoom call. Before that on Zoom, it seems like everyone had their cameras off and we were just speaking. But when work from homes came out, everyone wanted to see each other's faces. So we were really encouraged to always have our video on to help facilitate contact. So on week one of work from home, on our very first all company Zoom call, cameras on, one of my colleagues' husbands, she was in the kitchen and the computer was facing the door frame of their bedroom. One of my colleagues' husbands walked past her completely naked into the bedroom, and our entire company saw it. So that was fantastic on day one of work from home on our very first all company Zoom call.
That's spectacular. Thanks for sharing that. I couldn't resist. There's got to be at least one more, and we've got a couple minutes.
Yeah.
We're sitting good on time. So anybody else want to share anything? And while people are deciding whether to share or not, I do want to just let everybody know that the first 50 registrations received should have gotten a happy hour kit. So just wanted to let everybody know, if you get on screen, maybe hold up one of your snacks or something that you got in your happy hour kit. Since I didn't get one of those, I don't know what was in it for sure. So hold it up and just tell us what's in there. Anybody else want to share? Everybody's shy.
Yeah, Lee, this is Phil Lawler. I'll share a similar experience to the one that was just shared, but this was the one of the ladies that was on the call. Her, I'm gonna guess about 4 or 5 year old son decided to come running in and stuff up on the table at the back of her office, or the couch at the back of her office, to reach up and try to get something off the shelf. And there was a 5 year old little naked derriere right up above her right shoulder. So any of us as parents can go, yeah, I can certainly understand that happening.
That's pretty awesome. There seems to be a lot of naked people running around during the day. I just have to share, I had an issue with, we were doing a webinar and there were multiple panelists, and one of the panelists specifically asked to have all the panelists' video be left up. so that he didn't feel like he was talking to himself. And so I reluctantly agreed, and I know better, but I agreed anyways, and I will never do it again, because at one point, while another panelist was speaking, another panelist stood up, and of course, you know, he's at waist level on the camera, stood up, yanked up his drawers up to his chest. So you got this kind of crotch and belly shot of him yanking up his drawers. And my boss is texting me going, shut that video down. And I'm like, but that's what everybody wanted. So I won't do that again. I've learned my lesson. Anybody have the snacks that they can hold up? You have to say something though to show up on the video. I think I'm talking to myself.
Oh, Rick has one.
Cookies.
Cookie.
All right, come on, Richard. We know there was more than a cookie in there.
Yeah, there was.
Yeah, the other part's gone.
Oh, there was a wood. Drinks were on me, I guess.
Evidently the scotch is gone as well. Eric, back to you. Sorry to segue, but
No problem. So the next one, first and foremost, when you get in the group, introduce yourself and make sure you know they know who you are and everyone knows who you are in your breakout room. And then we're going back to the question on the screen. What questions are you hearing asked about antibiotic use and resistance, and how are you answering them? So with that, we'll move into our breakout rooms. JJ, meet a new set of people.
Hey, is everybody back? Looks like it. Great. All right. Anybody want to share anything from our breakouts? Everybody's quiet. Let's see, Megan. See, I can pick on people. Anything interesting shared? You can throw somebody else under the bus.
Let's see. I think it was interesting to see how we're all trying to share the science around antimicrobial resistance. And I've also learned that a lot of our colleagues are very active after work hours. I know it's a little after 5 p.m. here on the East Coast, but folks are really multitasking, and I'm very, very impressed how many people can have a conversation about the science of antibiotic resistance and pick up kids from soccer practice or drop kids off and do some other things.
I guess, Megan, this is Lucas, and you just threw me out of the under the bus, because that was me. I'm watching my daughters play soccer and talking with you guys, so it's been great.
I'm impressed. I can only focus on one thing at a time.
Yeah.
Well, Lee, I think one thing that came out of our group was that there's probably a lot of resources out there that we haven't tapped into yet. And so I know we're talking to Matt in our group, and again, thank you for Hugh coming on, because he's going to look at the information that you talked about from the beef board and dig into some of those broader topics that support the way we do things with raising our beef. And so, anything else to add to that, Matt?
Not necessarily. I think that sums it up well. I think just having the resources available and having better ways for everyone to effectively find them that matches the target audience is always really key.
So I want to thank Hugh for coming on. He wrote down your website. He's going to utilize that information too as another source. So, and we have a lot of those sources of information on the call today. So if you have people you met out in your breakout rooms, be sure and reach out to them and ask them. You can follow up. You can talk to them later. If you don't have a contact, reach out to JJ or to the NIAA crew or any one of us, and we'll try and get you hooked up with someone you're trying to talk to on a particular subject. So, Leah, anything else to add?
No, I was just going to pick on some more people because, you know, who else wants to share something? Eric and I were in the same room, so
yeah,
you see him right behind me. You can see Eric right behind me. So right there.
So I think it was interesting in our room, between myself, the cattle producer, and a veterinarian that works with producers, we typically don't get that question because we utilize antibiotics and don't see them as an issue because we utilize them under the labeled directions and we don't see a problem with it. And so we don't get that question. So my thought was coming around to those of us that use antibiotics in a responsible way. Maybe it's important for us to communicate that fact in some fashion to the consumer. And obviously we can do a better job of doing that. And maybe that is helpful when people see that we feed our families the same food that they're eating and we're not concerned about the responsible use of antibiotics in our production practices. So it was just a thought I had that maybe somehow we need to bridge that gap a little better than we have in the past.
I'll tell you, one of my very favorite techniques is as I get on a plane and I get settled in, if the person next to me looks like they might be somebody who wants to talk a little bit, occasionally I'll just kind of look at my watch and go, gosh, if everything runs on time, I'll get home in time to feed cattle with my family. And when I say that, it's always interesting to see the looks on the people next to you's faces, because so many times they haven't met a real farmer or a rancher before. So it can just open up a whole wealth of opportunity to chat about agriculture and answer some of the questions that they might have about the production of their food. And it entertains me. Anybody else want to share anything before we jump to the next question?
I'll share one. Oh, let me get my video. There we go. I'll share one. One of the things we talked about in our breakout room was labeling and how misleading some of that can be, and how even though there's a disclaimer to the labeling sometimes, the no antibiotics ever, and then there'll be a label about what USDA will allow. It's interesting that not more has been done to kind of curb what can and cannot be said about some of those claims. So that was a good discussion point.
Thanks for sharing that, Morgan. Anybody else? Last call before we jump to the next question. I know some of you get questions about antibiotic use or resistance, especially if they find out what you do. All right, we're going to move to the next question in the last few minutes here. Here it is. What topic are you most looking forward to learning about during the remainder of the symposium? So what topic? And then
And JJ, are we back yet? Nope.
We will be in 10 seconds. Everybody will rejoin us.
All right.
I think we're coming back. Are you on mute, Eric? Or am I?
No.
Okay.
Should I be? Did you want me on mute?
No, you're good. You're good. I just, for some reason, can't see the bottom of my screen right now, so I can't tell how many participants are in.
34.
Okay. So we're losing them a little bit. If we're all back. Anybody want to share anything about what they're excited to learn?
I'm going to volunteer my group because we were having a rousing conversation about feed additives in lieu of antimicrobials. And Justin Welsh and Michael Costin had some good back and forth on what's legal and what's being researched.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yep.
Turn your video on, Michael. I think that's who's talking.
Yes. I apologize. Should be on now.
Okay.
So there was a question if there were any feed additives out there that could be used in lieu of antimicrobials in the feed. My response was that, there's lots of feed additives available, but none that are marketed under the status, as an alternative to an antimicrobial, because in order to make an antimicrobial claim, it would first have to go through the FDA's testing process. And then if it had that claim, it would therefore it would then need a VFD order to be fed. That's when Justin from Merck jumped in. He did inform us that there are numerous studies ongoing right now into feed additives, but we weren't able to finish the conversation to see if any of those were pursuing antimicrobial claims.
I think that's the hard part, is because once you start making a claim, then it's a drug and it has to go through the FDA process.
Correct.
To me, that's part of the issue.
Yep. Sorry, I can't seem to find my mute button today for some reason. Yeah, no, that was when we moved back to the main floor. That was my next statement. Yeah, I mean that's the next step is we have to make is it's a whole different ball game to take the step to make a claim, right? With respect to resources needed, studies needed, those kind of things. And so the GRAS products have gained, I would argue, a fairly significant foothold just because of some of the positive things that some of these operations see happen with them. So yeah, it's a interesting topic to discuss. How we move forward with those, and I think we also get underneath the impression that we put a feed additive in and it becomes the end all be all. Well, not necessarily. I mean, you have to decide what you're after, right? Is it, what pathogen? Is it food safety, reason? Is it a performance? What is it? And so pretty challenging field, especially when you cross over into the claims.
Anybody else want to share anything? Let's see, I have an empty screen.
Leah, this is Mike Costin again. Can you hear me?
I can.
One of the other, regarding the question of this breakout session, I did share that I'm really looking forward to learning more about the international component of the antimicrobial resistance discussion. I'm looking forward to hearing, Doctors Anandaraman, Davis, and Filthy kind of weigh in. I work in this field in my role with AVMA, but most of my interactions have been with the USDA, and I'm still learning on a daily basis. I'm really interested to see how the State Department and the Department of Health and Human Services are part of this action on behalf of the U.S. government, because that's not something that I've come across in my work before. So.
Thanks, Michael. And I actually didn't get a chance to share in my breakout, but I know one of the things that I'm very interested about is just the whole environmental piece, that environmental piece of antibiotic resistance and what role does that play. And I don't know that we're going to get into a lot of details in that, but I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. I know that's one of the questions that that I need to learn more about. So I think that this is a good opportunity to kind of start that.
So one other question we discussed in our breakout group outside of the one we had started with is, what do people think is missing from the symposium? And that's something I wouldn't say we have to bring it up here, but if you want to reach out to anyone on the planning committee, to JJ or Morgan, anyone within NIAA, feel free. If there's something you feel is missing, we sure want to make sure we represent all parts of our industry, and we would encourage you to reach out and let us know.
Yeah, and I'll just make the pitch now that there will be a symposium review or a survey afterwards, and please take the time to fill that out. I'll just make the pitch now. Take the time to do that, because that is how we get better. We do pay attention to what those say. If there are things missing, if there are things that you want to hear about or learn more about, then that's the perfect opportunity to get some of that information down. And we pay attention to that when we're building the next conference to help direct us on what we need to talk about. And I see JJ just put his email in the chat box there. JJ Jones, is there a dot in between there? jj.jones@animalagriculture.org or morgan.young@animalagriculture.org is another way if there's something you want to share. Those are the two folks to be able to do that with.
And if you all forget that, any communications that comes out of NIAA, you can just hit reply, and that's going to get bounced to our generic communications email, which comes to me. So that will work too.
Adding all that stuff is a good reason to become a member of NIAA if you're not. Just to pitch it's good to get involved and drive the conversation.
Absolutely. Anything else anybody wants to share? I feel like happy hour is kind of winding down. I know it's 20 till 6 here in Eastern time, so it's dark. Any last thoughts before we talk about tomorrow? Silence from the masses. Eric, I think that's our cue.
Says we've lost him, Leah.
I'm afraid. Maybe we've bored them to death. I don't know. At least I saw a couple of heads going no.
Yeah. I think they were sneezing. But any other comments or questions?
No, not at all. The breakout sessions were great. I think we had some really interesting, more in-depth conversations than I expected. I appreciated in ours the discussion about the economics of the cattle industry and whether new technologies can tie into behavioral monitoring to identify sick animals a little bit earlier, and how some of the larger volume herds are able to sort of feed animals out that sort of reduces that transmission or that shock to, having to get over to a different feed. Any kinds of alternatives reduce the need for antibiotics. I think that was a common theme in our group. Nice.
Great. Megan, are those pictures from back home you have as your background? Or are they
They are. This is my cousin's place. If this were home in New Mexico, there would be no grass. It would be like but occasionally there's an opportunity to go and help them when calving season happens, which I enjoy.
Great. Well, good. We appreciate everyone's participation and activity in breakout rooms. Leah, do you want to kind of give them a rundown for tomorrow? What they expect?
Sure. So tomorrow we're going to be talking about updates. We're going to do some updates from experts in human, companion, and farm animal health and stewardship. So we'll be talking a lot about stewardship tomorrow. We'll hear from USDA, CDC, FDA, AVMA, and NIAA, which is Iowa State's group. So we will look forward to having you back tomorrow. And I'm going to double check what time so I don't tell you the wrong time. Or JJ can pop on here and tell us all. Looks like we're at 1 Eastern, noon Central. Haha, noon Central. So tomorrow we start at noon Central, 1 Eastern, and everybody can subtract from there. So that's all we have for this evening. We thank you again for joining us, and we'll look forward to additional discussions tomorrow. Any last minute thoughts, Morgan?
Nope.
Are we good? Excellent.
We're all good.
We'll see you tomorrow. Everybody have a great evening. Good night.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Leah.
Yeah.